Have you ever wondered if the technologies we take for granted today might have their origins in ancient wisdom we've nearly forgotten? What if I told you that one of the most effective rescue systems of World War II wasn't developed in a high-tech laboratory, but was instead based on a centuries-old Native American communication technique? Before we dive into this incredible, largely untold story of how ancient knowledge saved hundreds of lives during mankind's darkest hour, take a moment to comment where you're from and subscribe to our channel. We need your support to continue bringing these hidden chapters of American history to light. The date was June 7th, 1942. The world was engulfed in the flames of the Second World War, and the United States had been officially involved for just 6 months following the attack on Pearl Harbor. As the Allied forces struggled against the Axis powers across multiple theaters, a curious meeting was taking place at the Aberdeen Proving Grounds in Maryland, where British and American military engineers had gathered to address a critical problem that was costing countless lives. "Gentlemen, our pilots are dying," began Colonel William Harrington of the Royal Air Force, "not just in combat, but after being shot down. They survived the crash only to perish before rescue teams can locate them." The problem was painfully simple, yet seemingly impossible to solve. When Allied planes were shot down over the English Channel or the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean, pilots who survived the initial crash often had no effective way to signal their location to rescue aircraft. Conventional flares were quickly depleted, and the standard-issue dye markers dispersed too rapidly in choppy waters to be visible for long. "We need something that can be spotted from high altitude, can function in wet conditions, and will remain visible for hours rather than minutes," explained Lieutenant Commander Robert Thornton of the U.S. Navy. "Our current solutions are failing these requirements." The assembled engineers presented various proposals: improved flares, radio beacons, enhanced dye formulations, but each had critical flaws. The flares burned too quickly and were useless in daylight. Radio beacons were too heavy and complex for standard survival kits. The dyes, while promising, dissipated too quickly in turbulent waters. As the meeting appeared to be reaching an impasse, an unexpected voice spoke up from the back of the room. "Sir, I might have a suggestion, if you're willing to consider something unconventional." The voice belonged to Dr. James Blackfoot, a chemist from Oklahoma who had been recruited to work on the Manhattan Project, but had been temporarily assigned to the Aberdeen Proving Grounds while awaiting his security clearance. Dr. Blackfoot was one of the few Native Americans with a doctorate in chemistry at that time, having graduated from the University of Chicago in 1938. The room fell silent as Blackfoot made his way to the front. Several of the military officers exchanged skeptical glances. Who was this civilian to interject at such a high-level meeting? "With all due respect," Dr. Blackfoot began, "I believe the solution to your problem may lie not in cutting-edge technology, but in ancient wisdom that has been perfected over centuries." Colonel Harrington raised an eyebrow. "Go on, Doctor. I'm Cherokee, and my people have used smoke signals for communication across vast distances since before Europeans arrived on this continent," Blackfoot explained. "What made these signals effective wasn't just the smoke itself, but specific compounds added to the fire that created smoke with distinct properties: denser, more persistent, and visible even in adverse weather conditions." Several officers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One whispered audibly to another, "We're here to discuss serious military solutions, not Native American folklore." Colonel Harrington silenced the murmurs with a raised hand. "Dr. Blackfoot, while I appreciate cultural traditions, we're dealing with modern warfare. How could smoke signals possibly help downed pilots in the middle of the ocean?" "That's just it, sir," Blackfoot replied, undeterred. "I'm not suggesting we teach pilots to make fires on their life rafts. I'm suggesting we adapt the chemical compounds used in traditional smoke signals to create a new type of maritime marker, one that would create a dense, persistent cloud in water, rather than in air. Blackfoot went on to explain that traditional Cherokee smoke signals used specific combinations of green wood, resins, and certain mineral-rich clay that, when burned together, created smoke with unique properties. The smoke was extraordinarily dense, could maintain its cohesion even in windy conditions, and contained compounds that reflected sunlight in distinctive ways, making it visible from great distances. The principles of colloidal suspension that make these smoke signals effective could be applied to develop a water-based marker. Blackfoot continued, "If we can identify and synthesize the active compounds, we might create a dye marker that doesn't disperse, but rather forms a cohesive mass that remains visible for hours, not minutes." The room remained skeptical, but Commander Thornton, who had been taking notes, looked up with interest. "Dr. Blackfoot, are you suggesting that your ancestors had developed complex chemical compounds for their smoke signals?" "That's precisely what I'm saying." Blackfoot nodded, though they wouldn't have described it in chemical terms. Through centuries of observation and experimentation, they identified natural substances that, when combined, created smoke with specific properties ideal for long-distance communication. This wasn't primitive trial and error. It was sophisticated empirical science, just without the formal language of modern chemistry. Colonel Harrington, though clearly dubious, was desperate enough to entertain any potential solution. "Very well, Doctor. You have 1 week to provide us with a proof of concept. If your traditional compounds show promise, we'll allocate resources for further development. If not, we'll proceed with more conventional approaches." Dr. Blackfoot nodded, suppressing a smile. "Thank you, Colonel. I'll need access to a laboratory and 2 assistants familiar with organic chemistry." The next morning, Dr. Blackfoot began work in a small, hastily allocated laboratory on the edge of the Aberdeen facility. His assistants, Lieutenant Sarah Donovan, a chemist who had worked for DuPont before the war, and Corporal Michael Chen, a graduate student in chemistry from MIT who had enlisted after Pearl Harbor, initially approached the project with undisguised skepticism. "So, we're really investigating smoke signals?" Lieutenant Donovan asked as they set up the laboratory equipment. "Not exactly," Blackfoot replied, unfazed by her tone. "We're identifying specific compounds from traditional formulations and adapting them for modern application. Think of it as pharmaceutical research. Many of our most effective medicines were derived from traditional remedies once their active compounds were identified and refined." Over the next 3 days, Dr. Blackfoot worked tirelessly, combining his knowledge of traditional Cherokee smoke signal preparations with modern chemical analysis. He had brought with him several samples of the resins, woods, and clays traditionally used by Cherokee signal makers. These he systematically broke down into their component parts, isolating various compounds and testing their properties. The breakthrough came on the 4th day. Blackfoot had isolated a particular resin compound that, when combined with certain mineral elements from the clay, formed a unique colloidal suspension that remained cohesive even when introduced to water. Unlike conventional dyes that dispersed through molecular diffusion, this compound formed microscopic capsules that clung together while suspended in liquid. "Look at this," he called to his assistants, pointing to a beaker where he had added the compound to water. Instead of dispersing evenly throughout the liquid, the substance formed a distinct cloud that maintained its shape even when the beaker was gently swirled. "That's unusual," Lieutenant Donovan admitted, her skepticism beginning to fade. "What's causing that behavior?" The resin contains naturally occurring polymers that, when combined with the aluminum silicates from the clay, form a unique hydrophobic structure, Blackfoot explained. Essentially, they're creating microscopic bubbles that trap air and repel water, allowing the compound to float while maintaining cohesion. Corporal Chen, who had been observing through a microscope, looked up with amazement. "The molecular structure is like nothing I've seen before. It's almost as if it's designed specifically for this purpose. In a way, it was, Blackfoot replied. Through generations of refinement, my ancestors selected materials that optimized these properties. They just didn't have the vocabulary of molecular chemistry to describe why they worked. By the end of the week, Blackfoot and his team had developed a prototype compound that, when released into water, formed a vivid orange-yellow cloud that maintained its cohesion for nearly 8 hours, even in turbulent conditions. The color had been carefully selected to provide maximum contrast against both blue ocean waters and gray overcast skies, the conditions most common during air-sea rescue operations. When Colonel Harrington and Commander Thornton arrived for the demonstration, their initial skepticism had hardened into barely concealed impatience. They had spent the week reviewing more conventional proposals and clearly expected to dismiss Blackfoot's work quickly before moving on to serious solutions. The demonstration took place at a small artificial pond on the grounds of the facility. Blackfoot began by releasing a standard Navy dye marker into one section of the pond. The bright green dye quickly spread, creating an impressive but rapidly dispersing stain. The current marker remains visible for approximately 30 to 40 minutes in calm conditions, Blackfoot explained. In the turbulent waters typically encountered in the open ocean, visibility drops to less than 15 minutes. He then moved to another section of the pond and released a small packet of his new compound. As it hit the water, it immediately bloomed into a vivid orange-yellow cloud that was strikingly more cohesive than the standard dye. This is our compound, which we're calling Compound K137, Blackfoot stated, deliberately using scientific nomenclature rather than referencing its indigenous origins. As you can observe, it maintains structural integrity rather than dispersing. Colonel Harrington nodded non-committally, but Commander Thornton appeared genuinely interested. How long will it maintain that cohesion? In our laboratory tests, the compound remained visible and cohesive for approximately 8 hours, Blackfoot replied. We believe that in real-world conditions, it would provide a visible signal for at least 6 hours, even in moderate seas. Teat. And what's the visibility range? Thornton pressed. Based on its optical properties and density, we calculate it should be visible from aircraft at altitudes up to 20,000 feet, weather permitting, Blackfoot answered. The specific colorimetric properties make it highly distinguishable from natural ocean phenomena like algae blooms or sediment plumes. Colonel Harrington finally spoke, his voice measured. Dr. Blackfoot, while your demonstration is certainly interesting, I'm concerned about practicality. Can this compound be manufactured at scale? Is it stable in storage? Can it be packaged in a form suitable for inclusion in survival kits? These were legitimate questions, and Blackfoot was prepared for them. Sir, the active compounds can be synthesized using currently available industrial processes. Our preliminary tests indicate the compound remains stable in powdered form for at least 6 months, and we believe this can be extended significantly with proper packaging. As for inclusion in survival kits, the entire marker could be contained in a package no larger than a pack of cigarettes. The demonstration continued, with Blackfoot conducting various tests to show the compound's resilience to wave action, created by a small motorboat circling the pond, and its visibility under different lighting conditions. By the end, even Colonel Harrington's skepticism had visibly diminished. I must admit, Doctor, your results are impressive, the colonel conceded. Commander Thornton, what's your assessment? Thornton, who had been taking detailed notes throughout, looked up with a rare smile. I believe it warrants further development and field testing, sir. If Dr. Blackfoot's compound performs in real-world conditions as it has here, it could represent a significant advancement in air-sea rescue capabilities. Within a month, production of Compound K137, quickly nicknamed Cherokee Smoke by the pilots who began carrying it in their emergency kits, was underway at a small facility outside of Baltimore. By September 1942, It was being distributed to Allied air forces operating over the English Channel and North Sea. The first documented rescue attributed to the new compound occurred on October 3, 1942. Flight Lieutenant David Harrison of the Royal Air Force was shot down during a bombing run over German-occupied France. His Sterling bomber crashed into the English Channel, but Harrison and 2 other crew members managed to deploy their life raft before the aircraft sank. Following his training, Harrison immediately activated a packet of the Cherokee smoke marker. The distinctive orange-yellow cloud spread around their small raft and, crucially, maintained its visibility for nearly 7 hours until a patrolling Coastal Command aircraft spotted the signal and directed a high-speed rescue launch to their position. Upon his return to England, Harrison wrote in his after-action report, "The new marker compound undoubtedly saved our lives. Previous dye would have dispersed long before rescue arrived, leaving us virtually invisible in the vast expanse of the channel. I shudder to think what might have happened had we been equipped with the old markers." Similar reports began flowing in from both the European and Pacific theaters. Pilots who had been shot down and rescued repeatedly credited the new marker with making their location visible to search aircraft for extended periods, often under challenging conditions of heavy seas or poor visibility. Yet despite its growing reputation for effectiveness in the field, the full story behind Compound K-137 remained classified. Official documents referred to it only as an advanced persistent marker compound developed through collaboration between British and American chemical research teams. Dr. Blackfoot's contribution and the indigenous knowledge that had inspired it was deliberately omitted from official accounts. This omission was not accidental. In a memo dated November 12, 1942, Colonel Harrington wrote to his superiors at the Ministry of Defense, "While the effectiveness of the compound cannot be disputed, its origins in Native American traditional knowledge might be perceived as undermining confidence in our scientific capabilities. For morale and security purposes, I recommend that public and general military communications refer only to its development through conventional scientific research." Dr. Blackfoot himself was reassigned to the Manhattan Project shortly after the initial development of Cherokee smoke was complete. His subsequent contributions to the war effort, which were substantial, remained classified for decades. Like many Native Americans who served during World War II, his story was subsumed into the broader narrative of Allied scientific advancement, with its indigenous roots deliberately obscured. But in the field, where results mattered more than official narratives, pilots continued to place their trust in Cherokee smoke. By mid-1943, the compound had become standard issue for all Allied air crews operating over water. Training programs emphasized its proper use as a primary survival tool, and rescue crews were specifically trained to look for its distinctive signature. Commander Thornton, who had been among the first to recognize the compound's potential, began collecting data on air-sea rescues across all theaters. His analysis, completed in June 1943, revealed a startling statistic. Since the introduction of Cherokee smoke, successful rescues of downed air crews had increased by nearly 68%. In the Pacific Theater, where vast distances made search and rescue particularly challenging, the improvement was even more dramatic, nearly 83%. In a report to the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Thornton wrote, "Conservative estimates indicate that Compound K-137 has been directly responsible for saving the lives of at least 217 Allied airmen who would otherwise have perished before rescue could reach them. As deployment continues, this number will undoubtedly increase significantly." So, Titi, what made Cherokee smoke particularly effective wasn't just its persistence, but its unique visibility profile. Traditional dye markers, while initially bright, tended to blend with natural ocean phenomena when viewed from altitude. Cherokee smoke, with its distinctive orange-yellow hue and unusual cohesion pattern, was almost impossible to confuse with natural features. Rescue pilots reported being able to spot the markers from distances exceeding 15 miles under favorable conditions. Lieutenant James Wilson, a pilot with the Air Sea Rescue Squadron operating from England, described the difference in his journal. Before the new markers, finding a downed crew was like searching for a needle in a haystack. Now, it's like that needle is glowing in the dark. The distinctive pattern is unmistakable once you know what to look for, even from high altitude or at extreme distances. The impact on aircrew morale was profound. Pilots who previously faced the terrifying prospect of being lost at sea now flew with greater confidence, knowing that their chances of rescue had dramatically improved. This psychological benefit translated into operational advantages as aircrews were willing to take calculated risks that previously might have seemed too dangerous. Wing Commander Thomas Baker of Bomber Command noted this effect in a report to his superiors. The knowledge that rescue is more likely has had a measurable impact on crew willingness to press on with missions despite aircraft damage or adverse conditions. In at least 3 recent operations, crews have completed critical bombing runs despite damage that previously might have prompted early mission abortion, citing improved rescue capabilities as a factor in their decision-making. Yet as the war progressed and Cherokee smoke saved more lives, the question of its origins became increasingly obscured. By 1944, most pilots using the compound had no idea of its indigenous roots. Official training materials described it only as an advanced chemical marker developed through Allied scientific cooperation. Dr. Blackfoot, meanwhile, continued his work on the Manhattan Project, unable to speak publicly about his contribution to air-sea rescue operations. His security clearance prohibited him from discussing any aspect of his wartime work, even the unclassified portions. Like many scientific and technical achievements of Native Americans during the war, his innovation became part of the anonymous backdrop of Allied technological advancement. In the Pacific Theater, where vast distances and limited rescue resources made Cherokee smoke particularly valuable, pilots developed an almost superstitious attachment to the compound. Many refused to fly without checking that their survival kits contained the distinctive packets, and some even carried extras sewn into their flight suits. A technical violation of protocols, but one that commanders typically overlooked. Lieutenant Commander Jackson Hayes, who coordinated rescue operations for carrier-based aircraft in the Pacific, wrote in his memoirs, "The new marker compound changed the entire calculus of rescue operations. Before its introduction, we estimated that a downed pilot in open ocean had perhaps a 20% chance of rescue if they survived the initial crash. After, that number jumped to nearly 70%. It's not an exaggeration to say it was the most significant advancement in air-sea rescue technology of the entire war." By early 1944, as the Allied bombing campaign against Germany intensified and operations in the Pacific expanded, Cherokee smoke had become a critical component of air operations. Production facilities in both the United States and Britain worked around the clock to ensure an adequate supply for the growing number of aircraft and crews. The compound's effectiveness led to continued refinement and development. By mid-1944, an improved version, dubbed K-137B, extended visibility time to nearly 12 hours and incorporated a phosphorescent element that made it visible at night, further enhancing its rescue capabilities. Yet despite these advancements and the growing number of lives saved, the indigenous knowledge that had made it all possible remained unacknowledged in official accounts. The story of Cherokee smoke, as far as most military personnel and the public were concerned, was simply another triumph of modern Allied science over adversity, a narrative that was technically true but fundamentally incomplete. This official silence extended to Dr. Blackfoot himself. When interviewed for an internal War Department documentary on scientific contributions to the war effort in 1945, his work on the Manhattan Project was highlighted, but his development of Cherokee smoke went unmentioned. The interviewer, following a prepared script, never asked about his earlier work at Aberdeen. In a letter to his sister, dated July 1945, Blackfoot expressed his complex feelings about this omission. "My work here is important, and I'm proud to serve our country in this capacity. But sometimes I think of those pilots, floating on the vast ocean, waiting for rescue, and I wish I could tell people that it was our ancestors' wisdom that the government once tried to eradicate, that now saves these young men's lives. Perhaps, someday, the full story can be told." That day would be long in coming. As the war ended and the Cold War began, much of the technology developed during World War II remained classified or, if declassified, was presented in a manner that emphasized American scientific ingenuity rather than acknowledging diverse sources of knowledge. Cherokee smoke, now officially designated C marker compound K137, continued to be produced and improved upon. It became standard issue not just for military aircraft, but for commercial aviation and maritime vessels as well. Its effectiveness was beyond dispute, but its origins remained obscured. It wasn't until 1978, when the Freedom of Information Act led to the declassification of numerous World War II-era technical documents, that researchers began to piece together the true story of Cherokee smoke's development. Among these documents was Dr. Blackfoot's original proposal, which explicitly referenced traditional Cherokee smoke signal compounds as the inspiration for the marker. Dr. Elizabeth Runningwolf, a historian specializing in Native American contributions to U.S. military technology, stumbled upon these documents while researching an unrelated project. "I was astonished," she later wrote. "Here was clear evidence that one of the most significant life-saving technologies of World War II had its roots in indigenous knowledge that had been deliberately written out of the official narrative." Runningwolf's subsequent book, Invisible Contributions, Native American Knowledge in Modern Warfare, published in 1982, brought the story of Cherokee smoke to public attention for the first time. By then, Dr. Blackfoot had passed away, never having received public recognition for his achievement. The book sparked interest among both military historians and Native American advocacy groups. The American Indian Science and Engineering Society began campaigning for formal recognition of Blackfoot's contribution, arguing that his story represented just one example of how indigenous knowledge had been appropriated while its origins were systematically erased. In 1985, in response to growing pressure, the U.S. Navy formally acknowledged the indigenous origins of Compound K137 in a ceremony at the Naval Air Station Pensacola, where a plaque was dedicated to Dr. Blackfoot and the Cherokee knowledge traditions that saved hundreds of Allied airmen during World War II. This belated recognition, while welcome, highlighted a troubling pattern in how indigenous contributions to American technological and military advancement had been systematically minimized or erased. Dr. Runningwolf's research revealed that Cherokee smoke was far from an isolated case. Similar patterns could be found in developments ranging from pharmaceutical compounds to agricultural techniques to communication systems. What we see in the case of Dr. Blackfoot and Cherokee smoke, Runningwolf wrote in a follow-up paper, is not simply an oversight, but a deliberate decision to obscure indigenous origins in favor of a narrative that centered Western scientific methods. This erasure served both practical purposes, maintaining the prestige of military scientific establishments, and ideological ones, reinforcing the notion that indigenous knowledge was primitive and pre-scientific rather than sophisticated and empirical. The story might have remained a footnote in military history if not for an unexpected development in the late 1980s. As environmental concerns about conventional maritime markers grew due to their toxicity and persistence in marine ecosystems, researchers began seeking alternatives that were both effective and environmentally benign. Dr. Michael Redbird, a chemical engineer working for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, came across Dr. Running Wolf's book while researching historical marker compounds. Intrigued by the description of Cherokee smoke's unique properties, he obtained the original formulation documents from military archives. What struck me immediately was how the compound's effectiveness derived from natural polymers and minerals rather than synthetic petrochemicals, Dr. Redbird later explained. The indigenous approach had inadvertently created a marker that was not only more effective than modern alternatives, but potentially far less harmful to marine ecosystems. Redbird assembled a research team that included both conventional chemical engineers and experts in traditional Cherokee medicine and material use. Their goal was to re-engineer Cherokee smoke using modern analytical techniques while maintaining its core principles derived from indigenous knowledge. The resulting compound, officially named EcoMark, but quickly nicknamed New Cherokee Smoke by the Coast Guard personnel testing it, proved remarkably effective. Like its predecessor, it formed a cohesive, highly visible cloud that resisted dispersal. Unlike petroleum-based markers, however, it biodegraded naturally within 24 hours, leaving no harmful residues. Captain Sarah Whitefeather of the U.S. Coast Guard, who oversaw field testing of the new compound, reported, "EcoMark outperforms conventional markers in nearly every category: visibility duration, resistance to dispersal, altitude visibility, while eliminating the environmental concerns that have limited the use of traditional markers in sensitive marine ecosystems. It represents a significant advancement in search and rescue technology." The development of EcoMark sparked renewed interest in the original Cherokee smoke and its indigenous origins. Journalists, particularly those from Native American publications, began investigating the full story of how traditional knowledge had contributed to saving hundreds of lives during World War II, only to be written out of official histories. Tim Walkingstick, writing for Indian Country Today in 1991, framed the issue pointedly. The story of Cherokee smoke epitomizes the paradoxical relationship between America and indigenous knowledge, eager to benefit from it while refusing to acknowledge its value or origins. It raises uncomfortable questions about intellectual appropriation and historical erasure that remain relevant today. These questions took on new urgency as researchers began identifying other instances where indigenous knowledge had been incorporated into military and civilian technology without acknowledgement. From cold-weather survival gear based on Inuit designs to terrain navigation techniques derived from Apache scouting methods, a pattern emerged of systematic appropriation coupled with deliberate erasure of origins. In 1993, a group of surviving World War II pilots who had been rescued thanks to Cherokee smoke launched a campaign for formal recognition of Dr. Blackfoot's contribution. Led by retired Colonel William Jenkins, whose B-17 had been shot down over the North Sea in 1944, the group petitioned the Department of Defense to posthumously award Blackfoot the Distinguished Service Medal. "I owe my life to that marker compound," Jenkins stated at a press conference announcing the campaign. "For 50 years, I believed it was just another example of American scientific ingenuity. Learning that it came from indigenous knowledge that our government had long dismissed as primitive was a profound shock and a lesson in humility that I believe our nation needs to acknowledge formally." The campaign gained unexpected support from within the military itself. Admiral Thomas Kingsley, who had served as a rescue coordination officer in the Pacific Theater, became a vocal advocate for recognizing Blackfoot's contribution. As a young ensign coordinating search patterns for downed airmen, I witnessed firsthand how the introduction of Compound K-137 transformed our capabilities. Kingsley wrote in an open letter supporting the campaign, "What I never knew, what none of us knew, was that we were benefiting from centuries of Cherokee innovation and observation. This omission from our historical record does a disservice not only to Dr. Blackfoot and the Cherokee Nation, but to our understanding of the diverse sources of American strength and ingenuity. The Department of Defense initially responded with bureaucratic caution, citing the need for extensive historical review and verification. But, as media coverage expanded and more veterans came forward with stories of how Cherokee smoke had saved their lives, the pressure for recognition grew. In a parallel development, researchers at several universities began conducting more rigorous analyses of the original Cherokee smoke signal compounds that had inspired Blackfoot's innovation. These studies, using advanced analytical techniques unavailable during World War II, revealed sophisticated chemical interactions that challenged conventional assumptions about indigenous technical knowledge. Dr. Jennifer Eaglefeather, a chemist at MIT and herself a member of the Choctaw Nation, led one such research team. Their findings, published in the prestigious Journal of Ethnopharmacology, demonstrated that traditional Cherokee smoke signal preparations contained precisely calibrated mixtures of natural polymers, mineral catalysts, and organic compounds that interacted in complex ways to produce the desired effects. What these analyses reveal, Dr. Eaglefeather wrote, is not a lucky accident or simple empirical discovery, but a sophisticated understanding of material properties developed over centuries of careful observation and experimental refinement. The precision with which these compounds were formulated suggests a much more systematic approach to knowledge development than Western science has typically attributed to indigenous cultures. These scientific validations lent additional weight to the campaign for recognizing Blackfoot's contribution. In 1995, the Secretary of Defense finally announced that Dr. James Blackfoot would be posthumously awarded the Distinguished Service Medal for his exceptional contribution to the war effort and the saving of hundreds of Allied lives through innovative application of traditional knowledge to modern military challenges. The medal was presented to Blackfoot's daughter, Dr. Mary Blackfoot Williams, herself a distinguished physicist, in a ceremony at the Pentagon attended by dozens of elderly veterans who owed their lives to Cherokee smoke. In her acceptance speech, Blackfoot Williams addressed the broader implications of her father's long unrecognized achievement. "My father would be honored by this recognition, but I believe he would want it to serve a larger purpose," she said. "This is not just about acknowledging one man's contribution to a war fought half a century ago. It's about recognizing that knowledge comes in many forms and from many traditions, and that our nation is strongest when we respect and learn from all of them rather than privileging some while dismissing others." The ceremony received limited media coverage at the time, treated largely as a human interest story about correcting a historical oversight. But within military and scientific circles, it sparked important conversations about the relationship between indigenous knowledge and modern innovation that continue to resonate today. For the Cherokee Nation, the belated recognition of Blackfoot's achievement became a powerful symbol of the ongoing value of traditional knowledge in the modern world. The Cherokee National Historical Society established an annual scholarship in Blackfoot's name for tribal members pursuing education in chemistry and related sciences. Principal Chief Joseph Mankiller, speaking at the inaugural scholarship presentation in 1996, noted, "Dr. Blackfoot's achievement demonstrates what our people have always known, that our traditional knowledge is not a relic of the past, but a living resource with continuing relevance. His story reminds us that wisdom often comes not from discarding the old in favor of the new, but from finding the connections between them." The recognition of Cherokee smoke's indigenous origins also led to renewed interest in other potential applications of traditional knowledge to contemporary challenges. Researchers began working more closely with indigenous knowledge keepers to explore traditional solutions to problems ranging from environmental remediation to sustainable agriculture to disaster response. These collaborations, unlike earlier appropriations, increasingly emphasized respectful partnership and proper attribution. The Cherokee smoke story had become a cautionary tale about the consequences of dismissing and erasing indigenous contributions, a pattern that many institutions now sought to avoid repeating. In 2001, the U.S. Navy's Search and Rescue Training Center in Pensacola, Florida, unveiled a permanent exhibit dedicated to the development and impact of Cherokee smoke. The exhibit explicitly acknowledged both the indigenous origins of the compound and the historical erasure of those origins in official accounts. Captain Richard Whitehawk, who spoke at the exhibit's dedication, emphasized its contemporary relevance. As we train the next generation of search and rescue personnel, it's vital that they understand not just the technical aspects of their equipment, but the diverse sources of knowledge that have contributed to its development. The story of Cherokee smoke reminds us to remain open to wisdom from unexpected sources, a lesson as valuable in today's complex operational environment as it was in 1942. The exhibit became a standard stop for new trainees, many of whom expressed surprise at learning the true story behind a compound that remained, in modified form, part of their essential equipment. For many, it represented their first encounter with the concrete contributions of indigenous knowledge to military technology and operations. Commander Lisa Blackhorse, an instructor at the training center, observed the impact of this education. You can see the shift in perspective when trainees learn this history. There's an immediate broadening of their understanding of where valuable innovation can come from. Many have told me it changes how they approach problem-solving, making them more open to considering diverse perspectives and unconventional approaches. This educational impact extended beyond military contexts. By the early 2000s, the story of Cherokee smoke had been incorporated into numerous university courses, from chemistry to history to indigenous studies, serving as a case study in both the value of indigenous knowledge and the mechanisms through which that knowledge has been appropriated and erased. Dr. Runningwolf, whose research had first brought the story to public attention, reflected on this educational legacy in a 2005 interview. When I discovered those documents in 1978, I could never have anticipated how this story would resonate across so many domains. It's become more than a historical correction. It's a lens through which we can examine broader patterns of knowledge exchange, appropriation, and recognition that continue to shape our society. For the families of pilots saved by Cherokee smoke, the revelations about its origins added a new dimension to their understanding of survival. Many expressed a sense of connection to Cherokee culture and knowledge that they had never previously considered. James Henderson, whose father had been rescued off the coast of Japan in 1944, expressed this sentiment at a 2006 gathering of veterans' families. My father told me many times that he owed his life to that orange smoke that guided rescuers to his position. What he never knew, what none of them knew, was that they were being saved by knowledge that predated Columbus, knowledge that Western civilization had systematically dismissed as primitive. There's a profound lesson there about humility and respect that I believe is as important as the technology itself. The scientific analysis of the original Cherokee smoke signal compounds continued to yield surprising insights. In 2008, researchers at the University of Oklahoma identified several compounds in traditional formulations that had potential applications in modern materials science, particularly for creating environmentally friendly polymers with unique properties. Dr. Robert Eaglefeather, leading this research team, noted the irony. We're using cutting-edge analytical techniques to understand compounds that Cherokee people identified and refined centuries ago without any of our technology. Each time we identify another sophisticated chemical interaction in these traditional formulations, it further challenges our assumptions about the nature of indigenous scientific knowledge. This research led to several patents for new materials inspired by compounds found in traditional smoke signals. Unlike the development of Cherokee smoke, however, these patents explicitly acknowledged their indigenous origins and established royalty arrangements with the Cherokee Nation for any commercial applications. This shift in approach represented a broader evolution in how indigenous knowledge was being engaged with by scientific and commercial entities. The story of Cherokee smoke had become a frequently cited example of how not to appropriate indigenous innovation, a cautionary tale that influenced new policies and practices around attribution, compensation, and partnership. By 2010, the U.S. military had formalized this evolution in its approach to indigenous knowledge through the establishment of the Traditional Knowledge Integration Program, TKEP. This initiative actively sought to identify areas where traditional ecological, material, and tactical knowledge might contribute to military capabilities, while establishing clear protocols for proper attribution and compensation. Colonel Jennifer Whitecloud, who helped establish the program, explicitly cited the Cherokee smoke story as a motivating factor. The history of Compound K-137 demonstrated both the tremendous value of indigenous knowledge and the institutional failures that led to its appropriation without recognition. TKIP represents our commitment to learning from that history and establishing more equitable and effective ways of engaging with diverse knowledge systems. The program's early successes included the development of improved cold weather gear based on traditional Inuit designs, new approaches to desert navigation inspired by Navajo techniques, and sustainable field rations incorporating Native American food preservation methods. In each case, the indigenous origins were explicitly acknowledged, and tribal nations were engaged as active partners rather than passive sources of knowledge. For the Cherokee Nation, this evolution represented a significant shift in their relationship with federal institutions that had historically sought to suppress rather than learn from indigenous knowledge. Principal Chief David Walkingstick, speaking at a 2012 conference on indigenous innovation, observed, "The journey from the deliberate erasure of Dr. Blackfoot's contribution to today's collaborative research programs reflects a broader change in how our knowledge is perceived and engaged with. While there is still much progress to be made, the recognition that Western science can learn from rather than simply replace indigenous knowledge systems represents an important step toward more respectful and productive relationships. This shift extended beyond government and military contexts to influence academic research, commercial development, and public understanding. Increasingly, indigenous knowledge was being recognized not as a historical curiosity, but as a living resource with continuing relevance to contemporary challenges. Dr. Sarah Blackfoot Jones, granddaughter of James Blackfoot and herself a prominent environmental scientist, embodied this continuing legacy. Her research on sustainable approaches to environmental remediation explicitly integrated traditional Cherokee understanding of ecosystem relationships with modern scientific methods. "My grandfather bridged these knowledge systems out of necessity during wartime," she explained in a 2015 interview. "Today, we're creating these bridges deliberately, recognizing that the most effective solutions to complex problems often emerge from the integration of diverse ways of knowing." The story of Cherokee smoke isn't just history. It's a model for how we might approach the challenges we face today. One of the most significant impacts of the Cherokee smoke story has been on educational approaches, particularly in science and technology fields. Many universities now incorporate indigenous knowledge perspectives into their curricula, challenging students to consider multiple ways of understanding and approaching problems. Dr. Michael Redbird, whose work on Ecomark had helped reignite interest in the original Cherokee smoke, developed a popular course at the University of Arizona titled Indigenous Knowledge in Modern Science. The course used the Cherokee smoke case study as a starting point for exploring broader questions about knowledge creation, validation, and application across cultural contexts. What students find most transformative, Redbird noted, is recognizing that what we call science isn't a single uniform approach to knowledge, but rather a diverse set of practices and perspectives that have evolved differently across cultures. The story of Cherokee smoke helps them understand that indigenous approaches to knowledge weren't pre-scientific, but rather represented different but equally sophisticated systems for understanding and manipulating the material world. This educational impact extended to military training as well. By 2018, all U.S. military service academies had incorporated case studies on indigenous knowledge contributions, including the Cherokee Smoke story, into their leadership and innovation curricula. These additions reflected a growing recognition that cultural diversity in approaches to problem-solving represents a strategic advantage rather than an obstacle to overcome. Lieutenant General Maria Standing Bear, the highest-ranking Native American in the U.S. military and a key advocate for these curricular changes, explained their significance. Military leaders are fundamentally problem solvers who must make decisions in complex, ambiguous environments. The more perspectives and approaches they can draw upon, the more effective they will be. The story of Cherokee Smoke demonstrates how critical innovations can emerge from knowledge systems that our institutions have historically marginalized. A lesson that remains profoundly relevant to developing adaptive, creative military leadership. For the families of pilots saved by Cherokee Smoke during World War II, the full recognition of its origins brought a sense of completion to a story that had shaped their lives in profound ways. Many formed relationships with the Cherokee Nation, participating in cultural exchanges and contributing to educational initiatives that preserved and honored the knowledge that had saved their loved ones. William Jenkins, Jr., whose father had been one of the first pilots rescued thanks to Cherokee Smoke, established a foundation in 2019 dedicated to documenting and preserving stories of indigenous contributions to American military success. My father lived an additional 50 years because of knowledge that had been developed and refined by Cherokee people over centuries, Jenkins explained. That gift deserves to be fully acknowledged and honored, not just for historical accuracy, but because it represents a debt of gratitude that can never be fully repaid. See through, the Foundation's work has helped bring to light numerous other instances where indigenous knowledge contributed to military capabilities without recognition, from navigation techniques to camouflage methods to medical treatments for combat injuries. In each case, the Foundation has worked to ensure that these contributions are properly documented and acknowledged in historical accounts. As awareness of these contributions has grown, it has influenced broader public understanding of indigenous knowledge and innovation. The stereotype of Native American cultures as technologically primitive or static has increasingly given way to recognition of their sophisticated, empirically grounded knowledge systems that evolved over thousands of years of careful observation and experimentation. Dr. Elizabeth Runningwolf, whose initial discovery had brought the Cherokee Smoke story to light, reflected on this evolution in a 2020 interview. When I first published on this topic in 1982, the idea that indigenous knowledge had made significant contributions to modern technology was considered almost radical in many circles. Today, while there's still much progress to be made, there's at least a growing recognition that innovation has never been the exclusive province of any single cultural tradition. This recognition has practical implications for how contemporary challenges are approached. From climate adaptation strategies to sustainable resource management to disaster response, indigenous knowledge systems are increasingly being engaged as valuable sources of insight and innovation rather than historical curiosities. The Cherokee Nation has been at the forefront of this evolution, establishing the Indigenous Innovation Institute in 2021 to facilitate collaborative research that bridges traditional knowledge and contemporary challenges. The Institute explicitly cites the Cherokee Smoke story as a foundational example of how traditional knowledge can offer solutions to modern problems when approached with respect and openness. Dr. James Blackfoot, Jr., Aurifit, great-grandson of the original inventor and the Institute's first director, explained its mission. We're not preserving traditional knowledge as a museum piece or historical artifact. We're engaging with it as a living, evolving resource that continues to offer insights and approaches that complement and sometimes challenge conventional scientific paradigms. The story of Cherokee smoke demonstrates both the value of this knowledge and the consequences of failing to acknowledge and respect its origins. For the U.S. military, the lessons of Cherokee smoke continue to influence approaches to innovation and problem-solving. The traditional knowledge integration program has expanded significantly, establishing partnerships with more than 30 Native American tribes to explore potential applications of indigenous knowledge to contemporary military challenges. Admiral David Thunderhawk, who oversees the program, emphasized its strategic importance. In a world of increasing complexity and rapid change, the ability to draw upon diverse knowledge systems and perspectives represents a significant advantage. The Cherokee smoke story reminds us that breakthrough innovations often come from unexpected sources, and that our effectiveness depends on remaining open to wisdom in all its forms. This openness extends to how the military now approaches survival training. Modern search and rescue techniques incorporate numerous elements derived from indigenous knowledge, from signal methods to water finding to navigation. Unlike in the past, these origins are explicitly acknowledged in training materials and official documentation. Commander Thomas Redfeather, who leads survival training at the Naval Air Station in Pensacola, noted this change. Today's trainees learn not just how to use their equipment, but where the underlying principles came from. When they learn about marker compounds, they learn about Cherokee smoke signals. When they learn about cold weather survival, they learn about Inuit techniques. This context doesn't just honor the origins of these methods, it helps trainees understand the principles more deeply and apply them more effectively. The story of Cherokee smoke has also influenced how the military approaches research and development partnerships with indigenous communities. Rather than extracting knowledge without acknowledgement or compensation, modern programs emphasize collaborative development with clear attribution and benefit-sharing arrangements. Dr. Maria Blackhorse, who advises the Department of Defense on these partnerships, explained the shift. The Cherokee smoke story serves as both inspiration and warning. Inspiration about the potential value of indigenous knowledge, and warning about the ethical and practical consequences of appropriation without recognition. Today's partnerships aim to create relationships that respect indigenous knowledge, sovereignty, while allowing for innovations that benefit all parties. This evolution in approach extends beyond the military to influence how corporations, research institutions, and government agencies engage with indigenous knowledge more broadly. The principles of prior informed consent, appropriate attribution, and equitable benefit sharing, largely absent in the original development of Cherokee smoke, have increasingly become standard practice in cross-cultural knowledge exchanges. For the Cherokee Nation, this represents a significant transformation in how their knowledge is perceived and engaged with by mainstream institutions. Principal Chief Rebecca Mankiller, speaking at a 2023 conference on Indigenous intellectual property rights, observed, "For generations, our knowledge was either dismissed as superstition or appropriated without acknowledgement. The recognition of Cherokee smoke's origins and impact represents part of a broader shift toward understanding that indigenous knowledge systems are sophisticated, valuable, and deserving of both respect and protection." This shift has practical implications for how the Cherokee Nation and other indigenous peoples can maintain control over and benefit from their traditional knowledge, while still allowing for its appropriate application to contemporary challenges. Various models of indigenous knowledge licensing, collaborative research agreements, and benefit-sharing arrangements have emerged, many explicitly citing the Cherokee smoke story as a case study in both what to avoid and what to aspire to. For the veterans and families whose lives were saved by Cherokee smoke, the full recognition of its origins has created unexpected connections and relationships. Annual gatherings now bring together descendants of rescued airmen with members of the Cherokee Nation to commemorate both the lives saved and the knowledge that made those rescues possible. At one such gathering in 2024, 97-year-old Edward Thompson, one of the last surviving pilots rescued by Cherokee Smoke, expressed a sentiment shared by many. "I've lived a long life because of that orange cloud that guided rescuers to me. Learning that it came from Cherokee knowledge gave me a connection to a culture and people I might never otherwise have known. It taught me that wisdom comes in many forms and from many sources, a lesson our world needs now more than ever." Nadis, as we reflect on this remarkable story of how ancient wisdom saved hundreds of modern warriors, we're reminded of how knowledge transcends time and culture when we're humble enough to recognize its value regardless of its source. The pilots who floated on vast oceans, watching the distinctive orange-yellow cloud maintain its cohesion hour after hour until rescue arrived, never knew they were benefiting from centuries of Cherokee innovation and observation. Yet their lives were saved nonetheless. Perhaps the most powerful legacy of Cherokee Smoke is this reminder that wisdom often exists where we least expect to find it, in traditions we've dismissed, in voices we've silenced, in knowledge systems we've marginalized. The pilots who owed their lives to indigenous knowledge never knew its source, but we now have the opportunity to acknowledge and honor this debt. As we face the complex challenges of our own time, from climate change to pandemic response to sustainable development, the story of Cherokee Smoke invites us to approach these challenges with intellectual humility and openness to diverse ways of knowing. It reminds us that solutions may already exist within knowledge traditions that have been systematically devalued by dominant institutions, if only we have the wisdom to listen and learn. For the indigenous communities whose knowledge contributed to Cherokee Smoke and countless other unacknowledged innovations, this story represents both a belated recognition of past contributions and a model for more equitable engagement in the future. It demonstrates that traditional knowledge is not a static relic of the past, but a dynamic, evolving resource with continuing relevance to contemporary challenges. As we conclude this extraordinary journey through time, from ancient Cherokee signal fires to the rescue of World War II pilots to today's collaborative innovation partnerships, we're reminded of a fundamental truth: human ingenuity knows no cultural boundaries. Wisdom emerges from experience, observation, and experimentation, regardless of whether that process is framed in the language of Western science or indigenous knowledge traditions. The orange-yellow clouds that guided rescuers to downed pilots floating on vast oceans serve as a powerful metaphor for how knowledge itself can guide us through turbulent times. If we remain humble enough to recognize wisdom in all its diverse forms, and brave enough to follow where it leads, may we all learn from the story of Cherokee Smoke, finding in it not just a fascinating historical account, but a model for how diverse knowledge systems might work together to address the challenges we face today. And may we honor both the lives saved and the wisdom that saved them by creating a world where all forms of knowledge are respected, protected, and engaged with in the spirit of mutual benefit and understanding. Let us pray that God guides us to value wisdom from all sources, to recognize the divine spark that inspires innovation across cultures, and to follow Christ's example of honoring those whose contributions have been overlooked. For as Jesus taught us, the stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. Let us build a future where no wisdom is rejected simply because of its source, where all knowledge is valued as part of our shared human heritage, and where innovation emerges from respectful collaboration rather than appropriation. Amen.
At 07:15 on July 8, 1944, Private Guy Gabaldon stood at the base of Banzai Cliffs on Saipan, staring at cave entrances where hundreds of Japanese soldiers were hiding, contemplating suicide. 18 years old, 2 successful prisoner captures, 0 backup. The Japanese had launched a 15-hour banzai charge the night before, 4,000 Japanese soldiers had died in that suicidal attack. The survivors had retreated into volcanic caves along the cliffs. American commanders knew what came next. The Japanese would either fight to the death or kill themselves before surrendering. Gabaldon was 5 feet 4 inches tall. He weighed 130 pounds. He carried an M1 carbine, 4 hand grenades, and spoke broken Japanese he had learned on the streets of East Los Angeles. Most Marines on Saipan had never seen a Japanese prisoner. The Imperial Army fought with fanatical determination. Officers told their troops that Americans would torture them, rape their families, and desecrate their bodies. Surrender meant dishonor worse than death. The Bushido Code demanded suicide over capture. By early July 1944, the 2nd Marine Division had lost 3,000 men on Saipan. Japanese defenders had killed themselves rather than surrender. Civilians had jumped from cliffs holding their children. Gabaldon had watched hundreds of bodies wash up on the beaches after mass suicides at Marpy Point. He was born in East Los Angeles on March 22, 1926, 4th of 7 children. His father worked as a box maker and machinist. The family lived in Boyle Heights, one of the poorest neighborhoods in the city. Guy shined shoes on Skid Row starting at age 10. He ran errands for bar girls on Main Street. Police officers paid him in candy to report what he saw at night. At age 12, he moved in with the Nakano family. Japanese-American twins Lyle and Lane Nakano were his best friends from school. The Nakanos taught him their language. Not formal Japanese, street Japanese. The kind spoken in alleys and shops in Little Tokyo. Rough, direct, mixed with slang. When Pearl Harbor was attacked in December 1941, the United States government sent the Nakano family to Heart Mountain Internment Camp in Wyoming. Guy joined the Marine Corps on September 22, 1942. He convinced recruiters he was fluent in Japanese. He was not, but he knew enough to get by. After boot camp, the Corps sent him to the enlisted Marine Japanese language school at Camp Elliott in San Diego. He was assigned to Headquarters and Service Company, 2nd Marines, 2nd Marine Division, as a scout and observer. The Marines landed on Saipan on June 15, 1944. 8,000 Marines in the initial assault. Japanese artillery tore into them on the beaches. Gabaldon wore a baseball cap and aviator sunglasses. He thought it made him look like John Wayne. 2 nights after the landing, Gabaldon left camp without permission. He found 3 Japanese soldiers near a cave. He ordered them to drop their weapons in Japanese. One raised his rifle. Gabaldon shot him. The other 2 surrendered. He brought them back to camp. His commanding officer, Captain John Schwabe, threatened him with court-martial for abandoning his post. Gabaldon went out again the next night. He found a cave, shot 1 guard, threw a grenade inside, then shouted in Japanese that they were surrounded and had no choice but to surrender. 50 Japanese soldiers walked out with their hands raised. Captain Schwabe stopped threatening court-martial. Instead, he authorized Gabaldon to operate as a lone wolf. That was 6 days ago. Now, on the morning of July 8th, Gabaldon stood at Bonsai Cliffs with a problem nobody believed he could solve. Hundreds of Japanese soldiers and civilians were hiding in the caves above him. They had survived the failed Bonsai charge. They were armed. They were desperate. And they were preparing to die rather than surrender. American commanders wanted to use flamethrower tanks to burn them out, artillery to collapse the caves. Gabaldon had a different idea. He would walk up to the caves, alone, and convince them to surrender using nothing but broken Japanese and a bluff so stupid it might actually work. If you want to see how Guy's crazy bluff turned out, please hit that like button. It helps us share more forgotten stories like this. Subscribe if you haven't already. Back to Guy. Gabaldon grabbed 2 Japanese prisoners he had captured the day before. He told them they were going back to the cliffs. They would go into the caves. They would tell the soldiers inside that surrender was the only option. The prisoners looked at him like he was insane. Maybe he was. But at 07:30 on July 8, 1944, Guy Gabaldon started walking toward caves filled with hundreds of armed enemy soldiers who had been trained since childhood to never surrender. Gabaldon sent the two prisoners up the cliff path toward the cave entrances. He told them what to say. The Americans had warships offshore, bombers overhead, tanks on the beach. Fighting was over. Surrender meant food, water, medical treatment. No torture, no executions. Honorable conditions. The prisoners climbed. Gabaldon waited at the base of the cliffs. He could see cave openings 50 yards above him, dark holes in volcanic rock. He did not know how many Japanese were inside. Intelligence estimates ranged from 200 to over 1,000. Nobody knew for certain. The morning was hot, temperature already above 80 degrees. Humidity made the air thick. Gabaldon wore his baseball cap and sunglasses. He carried his M1 carbine, 4 grenades on his belt, 45 rounds of ammunition. If the Japanese decided to fight, he would die in approximately 30 seconds. He waited. The Battle of Saipan had begun 23 days earlier. American planners needed the island as a base for B-29 Superfortress bombers. Saipan was 1,300 miles from Tokyo, close enough for the new long-range bombers to reach the Japanese home islands. The island had 2 airfields. Japan had 32,000 troops defending it. Civilians numbered another 20,000. The 2nd and 4th Marine Divisions landed on June 15th. Japanese artillery fired from concealed positions in the hills. Mortars landed on the beaches before the Marines could dig in. The first day cost the Americans 2,000 casualties. The Japanese lost 5,000, but they kept fighting. General Holland Smith commanded the invasion. He told his Marines that Saipan would be tougher than Tarawa. He was right. Japanese defenders built interconnected cave systems, concrete pillboxes, underground tunnels, artillery positions hidden in volcanic rock. Every cave had to be cleared with flamethrowers, grenades, and explosives. By late June, the Japanese knew they were losing. Admiral Chuichi Nagumo was trapped on the island. He had commanded the carrier strike force at Pearl Harbor. Now he watched American forces close in from 3 directions. On July 6th, Japanese commanders ordered a final assault. Every soldier, every sailor, every officer who could still walk. They would attack in one massive banzai charge. The attack began at 4 a.m. on July 7th. 3,000 Japanese soldiers charged American positions along the Tanapag Plain. They carried rifles, bayonets, swords. Some had no weapons at all. They screamed and ran straight at American machine gun positions. The attack lasted 15 hours. By sunset, 4,000 Japanese were dead. The survivors retreated to caves along Banzai Cliffs and Marpi Point. Gabaldon knew the numbers. He had seen the aftermath. Japanese bodies stacked 3 deep in some places. American casualties were heavy too. The 27th Infantry Division lost 650 men in that one battle. The Japanese banzai charge accomplished nothing except mass suicide. Now the survivors were hiding in caves, waiting to die. Japanese officers told their men that Americans would commit atrocities if they surrendered. The propaganda was effective. Civilians jumped from cliffs holding their children rather than face capture. Marines found entire families dead at the base of Marpi Point. Mothers, fathers, babies. Gabaldon waited at the base of Banzai Cliffs for 30 minutes. No movement from the caves, no gunfire, no grenades rolling down the cliff path. He began to think his plan had failed. Maybe the prisoners never made it inside. Maybe the Japanese killed them immediately. Maybe nobody believed the offer of surrender. Then he saw movement. One Japanese soldier appeared at a cave entrance, then another, then 5 more. They were not armed. They walked slowly down the cliff path with their hands visible. Gabaldon raised his carbine. He aimed at the lead soldier. If this was a trick, he would shoot first and die second. The soldiers kept walking. More appeared behind them. 10, 20, 30. They were coming out of multiple caves. Some carried wounded. Others helped civilians walk down the steep path. Women, children, old men. They moved in silence. Gabaldon lowered his weapon slightly. He shouted in Japanese, "Form a line. Sit down. Do not run. Anyone who runs will be shot." The soldiers obeyed. They sat on the ground at the base of the cliffs. More kept coming. 50, 70, 100. Gabaldon realized he had a new problem. He was one Marine with a carbine. He was now surrounded by over 100 Japanese soldiers and civilians. Some of the soldiers still had weapons. Rifles slung over shoulders, pistols on belts. They had agreed to surrender, but if they changed their minds, Gabaldon could not stop them. He needed to buy time. He told the soldiers to separate from the civilians. Then he told them to separate the wounded from the healthy. This created confusion. People stood up, moved around, formed new groups. It took 15 minutes. During that time, more Japanese kept emerging from the caves. 200, 300, 400. Gabaldon was now completely surrounded by enemy soldiers on an open beach with no reinforcements in sight and more Japanese streaming down from the cliffs every minute. A Japanese officer appeared at the largest cave entrance. He wore a full uniform, sword at his hip. He walked down the cliff path alone. His posture was rigid, military. He stopped 20 feet from Gabaldon. The officer was older, maybe 40. He had survived the bonsai charge. That meant he was either lucky or smart. Probably both. Gabaldon lowered his carbine but kept it ready. He spoke in Japanese. He told the officer that resistance was finished. American forces controlled the island. The Imperial Navy had been destroyed in the Battle of the Philippine Sea 2 weeks earlier. No reinforcements were coming. Continued fighting meant death for everyone. Surrender meant survival. The officer listened without expression. He asked about treatment of prisoners. Gabaldon promised food, water, medical care. No torture, no executions. The officer asked if soldiers would be separated from civilians. Gabaldon said yes. The officer asked if wounded would receive treatment. Gabaldon said yes. The officer asked if personal items would be taken. Gabaldon said weapons yes, personal effects no. The conversation lasted 10 minutes. During that time, more Japanese emerged from the caves. 500, 600. The beach was filling with people. Soldiers sat in groups. Civilians huddled together. Children cried. Women tried to keep them quiet. Old men stared at the ground. Gabaldon pointed to the American warships visible offshore. Destroyers, cruisers, battleships. He told the officer those ships could flatten the cliffs in minutes. He pointed to the sky where American fighters flew patrol patterns. He said bombers would come next. The caves would become tombs. The officer looked at the ships, then at the aircraft, then at Gabaldon, an 18-year-old private wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses. The officer bowed slightly. He agreed to terms of surrender. He turned and shouted orders in Japanese. More soldiers emerged from caves. They came in groups of 10 and 20. Some limped. Some carried wounded on stretchers made from rifles and jackets. They moved slowly down the cliff paths. 700. 800. Gabaldon now faced a critical problem. He had approximately 800 Japanese soldiers and civilians sitting on a beach. He was alone. He had no radio, no way to call for backup, no transportation for prisoners, and Marine patrols might mistake this gathering for an enemy formation and open fire. He needed to get these prisoners to American lines, fast. But moving 800 people across 2 miles of contested terrain was impossible for one man. If the Japanese decided to disperse into the jungle, he could not stop them. If they decided to attack him, he would be dead in seconds. If Marine patrols saw this mass of people, they might shoot first and identify later. Gabaldon made a decision. He told the Japanese officer to organize the prisoners into columns. Soldiers in front, civilians in back. Wounded in the middle. Keep formations tight. No running, no talking. Anyone who broke formation would be shot. The officer relayed the orders. The Japanese began organizing themselves. While they formed up, Gabaldon climbed on a rock. He took off his white undershirt. He tied it to a broken tree branch, a makeshift surrender flag. He gave it to a Japanese soldier in the front rank. He told him to wave it constantly. Never stop waving. If American Marines see this flag, they will not shoot. If you stop waving, everyone dies. The column began moving. 800 Japanese, 1 American. They walked north along the beach toward American lines. Gabaldon stayed at the front of the column next to the flag bearer. He kept his carbine visible, but pointed down. He wanted approaching Marines to see him as friendly, see the surrender flag, not see a threat. They walked for 20 minutes. The beach was empty. No patrols, no vehicles. Just volcanic sand and scattered equipment from the battle. Gabaldon kept looking over his shoulder. 800 people moving in formation behind him. If this went wrong, he would be the first to die. Then he saw them. 3 Marines on patrol, about 300 yards ahead. They saw the column and immediately took defensive positions behind rocks. One raised binoculars. Gabaldon started waving both arms over his head. "American! Friendly! Prisoners! Do not shoot!" The Marines did not lower their weapons. They could see a massive formation of Japanese troops moving toward them. The surrender flag was visible, but small. They had no way to verify Gabaldon was American from that distance. They had no way to know this was a surrender and not an attack. One of the Marines raised his rifle. Gabaldon saw him aim. At 800 Japanese troops walking in formation behind one small Marine with a baseball cap. The perfect ambush target. Gabaldon started shouting, "English! American! Prisoners! Do not shoot! Do not shoot!" The Marine kept his rifle raised. His finger was on the trigger. 800 prisoners. 1 nervous Marine. And Guy Gabaldon standing exactly where the first bullet would hit if somebody made the wrong decision in the next 5 seconds. Gabaldon kept shouting in English. He pulled off his baseball cap and waved it. The Marine with the rifle hesitated. He lowered his weapon slightly, then raised it again. The other 2 Marines moved to better firing positions. They could see hundreds of Japanese troops in formation. Standard ambush doctrine said open fire immediately. Kill as many as possible before they scatter. Gabaldon stopped walking. He raised both hands above his head. He turned sideways so the Marines could see his uniform. "American Utilities, Marine Corps insignia." He shouted his name, rank, unit. "Private Guy Gabaldon, 2nd Marines, 2nd Marine Division. These are prisoners. Do not shoot." The lead Marine finally lowered his rifle. He stood up from behind the rocks. The other 2 stayed in position with weapons ready. The lead Marine walked forward slowly. He kept his distance, 20 feet. He asked Gabaldon what the hell was happening. Gabaldon explained. 800 prisoners from Banzai Cliffs, surrendered this morning. Need transport to prisoner holding area. The Marine stared at the column, then at Gabaldon, then back at the column. He asked how one private captured 800 Japanese. Gabaldon said he talked to them in Japanese, promised them food and medical care, pointed at the warships. They believed him. The Marine asked where Gabaldon learned Japanese. Gabaldon said East Los Angeles. The Marine said that made no sense. Gabaldon agreed. One of the Marines ran back toward American lines to get reinforcements. The other 2 stayed with Gabaldon. Within 30 minutes, trucks arrived. Marines from the 2nd Battalion. Captain John Schwab was with them. He looked at the 800 prisoners sitting in formation on the beach, then at Gabaldon. He asked what happened. Gabaldon gave his report. Walked to cliffs, sent prisoners into caves with surrender offer. Japanese came out. Talked to officer, marched them back. Schwab asked if Gabaldon had backup. Gabaldon said no. Schwab asked if he had a radio. Gabaldon said no. Schwab asked if he had authorization for this operation. Gabaldon said, "Yes, sir. You authorized me to operate as a lone wolf 6 days ago." Schwab did not respond. He ordered Marines to secure the prisoners and transport them to the holding area at Charan Kanoa. Processing 800 prisoners took 4 hours. Marines searched every soldier, confiscated weapons, knives, grenades, pistols. Some soldiers had brought sake bottles from the caves. Personal items were logged and returned. Photographs, letters, religious items. The Japanese were divided into groups. Military personnel separated from civilians. wounded sent to medical tents. The rest loaded onto trucks for transport. American intelligence officers arrived to interrogate the prisoners. They wanted information about remaining Japanese forces, defensive positions, troop strength, command structure. The Japanese officer who negotiated surrender provided detailed information. He said approximately 2,000 Japanese soldiers remained alive on Saipan. Most were hiding in caves in the northern part of the island. They had limited ammunition, no food, no medical supplies. They were waiting to die. The intelligence was valuable. It allowed American commanders to plan final operations to clear the island. Marines knew where to search, which caves to target, how many enemy remained. The information probably saved American lives. But Gabaldon never received credit for that. The intelligence reports did not mention his name. By late afternoon on July 8th, the 800 prisoners were secured. No incidents, no escapes, no violence. The largest single-day prisoner capture by one individual in United States military history. And most Marines on Saipan never heard about it. The story did not spread through the division. No press coverage, no commendations announced. Just another day in the campaign. Gabaldon returned to his unit. He cleaned his weapon, ate sea rations, slept for 6 hours. The next morning, he requested permission to go out again. Schwab approved. There were more Japanese in caves along the northern coast, more opportunities for surrender negotiations. Gabaldon grabbed his carbine and headed north. Over the next 3 weeks, Gabaldon continued his lone wolf operations. He captured smaller groups, 15 prisoners, 20, 30. He developed a reputation among Japanese troops. The small Marine who spoke broken Japanese and kept his promises. Some groups sent messengers asking for him specifically. They would only surrender to Gabaldon, not to other Marines, only him. By the end of July, Gabaldon had captured over 1,300 Japanese soldiers and civilians, more than any other individual in the Pacific Theater, more than any soldier in any American war. Captain Schwab recommended him for the Medal of Honor. The recommendation went to General Holland Smith. Smith reviewed it, then downgraded it to a Silver Star. No explanation given. On August 1st, Gabaldon and his unit moved to Tinian. The island was 4 miles south of Saipan. Marines were conducting mopping-up operations. Japanese holdouts were scattered in caves and jungle. Gabaldon began the same process, negotiating surrenders, talking to soldiers in caves, promising fair treatment. On August 15th, Gabaldon was on patrol in northern Tinian, hunting Japanese holdouts. He approached a cave entrance, called out in Japanese, offered surrender. 3 Japanese soldiers emerged. They aimed rifles at him. Gabaldon raised his hands, started talking. Food, water, medical care, no torture. Then he heard the machine gun. Japanese machine gun fire came from the right flank. Gabaldon dove behind a fallen tree. Bullets tore through vegetation above his head. The 3 Japanese soldiers at the cave entrance scattered. 2 ran back into the cave. 1 dropped his rifle and fell. Hit by friendly fire from the machine gun position, Gabaldon crawled behind the tree trunk. He could hear the machine gun traversing, searching for targets. The weapon was a Type 92 heavy machine gun, 7.7 millimeter. Effective range, 800 meters. It was firing from an elevated position, approximately 150 meters away. The gunner could not see Gabaldon behind the tree, but was firing in a pattern to suppress movement. The patrol Gabaldon was with had spread out when the shooting started, 5 Marines total. They were pinned down behind rocks and trees. Nobody could move without exposing themselves to machine gun fire. The Japanese gunner was disciplined. He fired short bursts, conserving ammunition, waiting for someone to break cover. Gabaldon assessed the situation. The machine gun position was too far for grenades, too well protected for rifle fire. Flanking was impossible across open ground. Standard Marine Corps doctrine said call for support. Mortars, artillery, maybe airstrike if available. But this was a small patrol. No radio, no heavy weapons. Just 5 Marines with rifles against the fortified machine gun position. The firing stopped. Silence. The Japanese gunner was waiting. Gabaldon stayed behind the tree. Minutes passed. No movement. No sound except insects and wind through palm trees. Then the machine gun opened up again. Different angle. The gunner was repositioning between bursts, trying to catch Marines in new firing lanes. One Marine tried to move. The machine gun found him immediately. Bullets impacted rocks near his position. He went flat, stayed down. The gunner fired another burst, then stopped, waiting again. This was a veteran crew. They knew how to control a position, how to keep enemy pinned, how to wait for mistakes. Gabaldon realized they were in a tactical stalemate. The Japanese could not advance without exposing themselves. The Marines could not retreat without crossing open ground. Nobody could move. The Japanese had time on their side. They were in a fortified position with ammunition and water. The Marines were exposed with limited supplies. If this lasted until dark, the Japanese could withdraw, or the Marines could be reinforced. But that was hours away. Then Gabaldon heard movement behind him. Close. He turned his head slowly. Saw 3 Japanese soldiers crawling through undergrowth, 20 meters away. They were trying to flank the Marine position. Move through jungle while the machine gun kept everyone pinned. Classic infantry tactics. Pin with fire, flank with infantry. Destroy the trapped unit. Gabaldon could not warn the other Marines without revealing his position. Could not shoot without alerting the machine gun crew. He stayed motionless. Watched the 3 soldiers crawl closer. They moved carefully, quietly. They carried rifles and grenades. They were planning to get within grenade range of the pinned Marines, throw explosives, then assault with rifles. 15 meters. 10 meters. The lead soldier stopped, raised his head slightly, scanning for targets. He saw one Marine behind a rock 30 meters ahead. The soldier signaled to the others, pointed. They began positioning for the attack. One soldier pulled a grenade from his belt, Type 97 hand grenade. Effective kill radius, 10 meters. He prepared to throw. Gabaldon made a decision. He could shoot the 3 soldiers, kill them before they threw grenades. But that would alert the machine gun crew. They would know Marine positions, concentrate fire, possibly kill everyone. Or he could let the grenades be thrown, hope they missed, hope the Marines survived. Neither option was good. He raised his carbine, aimed at the soldier with the grenade, fired 3 rounds. The soldier dropped. The grenade fell from his hand, rolled 3 feet, exploded. The blast killed the other 2 soldiers. Wounded vegetation, created a cloud of smoke and dirt. The machine gun opened fire immediately. Bullets ripped through the smoke, hit trees, tore branches. Gabaldon rolled left, behind a different tree. The machine gun tracked him, fired a sustained burst, 20 rounds, 30. The gunner was angry now, undisciplined, wasting ammunition. Gabaldon heard Marines returning fire, rifles cracking, trying to suppress the machine gun. Gabaldon moved again, crawled through undergrowth toward the cave entrance. The 3 Japanese soldiers he had been negotiating with were still inside. He reached the entrance, stayed low. The machine gun was firing at the Marine patrol, not watching the cave. Gabaldon shouted into the cave in Japanese, "Surrender now! Your machine gun crew is surrounded. You will all die. Come out." No response. He threw a grenade into the cave. Small explosion. Smoke poured from the entrance. He heard coughing inside. Movement. One soldier emerged with hands up. Then another. Both wounded. Bleeding from grenade fragments. They collapsed at the cave entrance. Gabaldon searched them. No weapons, no grenades. He pulled them away from the entrance. Applied pressure bandages from his first aid kit. The machine gun was still firing. Longer bursts now. The crew was panicking, running low on ammunition, making mistakes. Then Gabaldon felt the impact. His left leg, just above the knee. Sharp pain. Then numbness. He looked down. Blood spreading through his utility trousers. Machine gun round. 7.7 millimeter. Through and through. He had been hit. Gabaldon applied a tourniquet above the wound. Field first aid training. Stop the bleeding. Stay conscious. Keep fighting. The pain was manageable. Shock had not set in yet. He could still move. Still think. The machine gun was still firing at the Marine patrol. They were returning fire, keeping the gunners suppressed. Gabaldon crawled toward the Marine positions, dragged his wounded leg, blood trail behind him. 20 meters. 30. He reached the nearest Marine behind a rock formation. The Marine saw the wound, started to apply a better bandage. Gabaldon waved him off, said the machine gun had to be dealt with first, otherwise nobody was getting out. The Marine nodded. He signaled to the others. 3 Marines were still combat effective. 2 had minor wounds from rock fragments. Gabaldon told them the machine gun position was approximately 150 meters northeast, elevated, good fields of fire, veteran crew. They needed to flank it or call for support. 1 Marine said no radio, no support available. They had to handle it themselves. Gabaldon said he could talk to them in Japanese, offer surrender, maybe avoid the fight. The Marine looked at Gabaldon's leg, said he was not walking anywhere. Gabaldon agreed, said bring me closer, I will negotiate from cover. 2 Marines carried Gabaldon forward, stayed low, used trees and rocks for concealment. They moved 50 meters closer to the machine gun position, close enough for Gabaldon to shout, far enough to avoid being overrun. They set him down behind a large rock. Gabaldon called out in Japanese, told the machine gun crew their situation. Surrounded, low ammunition, no reinforcements coming. Surrender was the only option. The machine gun answered with a burst of fire. Bullets hit the rock. Ricochets screamed overhead. The crew was not interested in negotiation. Gabaldon tried again, offered medical treatment, food, water, promised fair treatment according to Geneva Convention. Another burst of fire, longer this time. The gunner was emptying the belt. The Marines flanked while the machine gun focused on Gabaldon's position. 2 Marines moved through heavy vegetation, used the terrain. Approached from the left side. The machine gun crew did not see them until they were 30 meters away. The Marines threw grenades. 2 explosions. The machine gun stopped firing. The Marines assaulted the position, found 3 Japanese soldiers, 1 dead from grenade fragments, 2 wounded. The machine gun was a Type 92 on a tripod mount. Ammunition boxes scattered around the position. Empty belts. The crew had been running low. Probably would have withdrawn within the hour. The Marines secured the prisoners. Then came back for Gabaldon. His leg wound was serious. Bone was not hit, but muscle damage was extensive. He needed evacuation, medical treatment. The patrol began moving back toward friendly lines. Gabaldon was carried on a stretcher made from rifles and ponchos. The 2 Japanese prisoners from the cave walked under guard. It took 2 hours to reach American positions. Gabaldon was evacuated to the battalion aid station. Navy corpsmen cleaned and dressed the wound, administered morphine, checked for infection. The bullet had passed through cleanly, no arterial damage, no bone fragments. But the wound was deep. Recovery would take months. Gabaldon was loaded onto a truck, taken to the beach, put on a landing craft, transferred to a hospital ship offshore. The ship sailed for Hawaii the next day. Gabaldon spent 3 weeks in transit. His leg was healing, but slowly. Physical therapy was painful. Walking was difficult. The Navy doctor said he would recover full mobility, but his combat days were finished. He would be medically discharged. While Gabaldon was on the hospital ship, Captain Schwab filed his recommendation for the Medal of Honor. The paperwork included witness statements from Marines who had seen the 800 prisoners on July 8th, intelligence reports about information gained from interrogations, estimates about American lives saved through prisoner intelligence, the total count of prisoners Gabaldon had captured, 1,300 soldiers and civilians, the largest individual capture in United States military history. The recommendation went to General Holland Smith, commander of all Marine forces in the Pacific Campaign. Smith reviewed it. He had authority to approve or disapprove Medal of Honor recommendations. He chose to downgrade it to Silver Star. No written explanation was provided. No appeal process existed. The decision was final. Some historians later speculated why. Gabaldon was Mexican-American. Minority soldiers rarely received top decorations in World War II. Or perhaps Smith did not believe one private could capture that many prisoners. Or maybe the intelligence value was not considered sufficient. Nobody knows for certain. Smith never explained his decision publicly. Gabaldon arrived in Hawaii in early September 1944. He was transferred to Aiea Naval Hospital near Pearl Harbor. His leg was healing well. He could walk short distances with a cane. Physical therapy continued. The doctors projected full recovery by December. Then, medical discharge. Gabaldon would return to civilian life at age 18. His war was over. But the war itself was not over. American forces were pushing toward Japan. More islands to capture. More battles to fight. Iwo Jima, Okinawa, the Japanese home islands. Gabaldon read reports in the hospital, followed the progress, wondered if his methods could have saved more lives, if other Marines could negotiate surrenders instead of fighting to the death. One evening in late September, a Navy officer visited Gabaldon in the hospital. He carried official paperwork. He informed Gabaldon that he was being awarded the Silver Star for extraordinary heroism on Saipan and Tinian. The medal would be presented in a ceremony once he recovered. Gabaldon asked about the Medal of Honor recommendation. The officer said it had been reviewed and adjusted. No further information available. Gabaldon accepted the Silver Star. He knew it was a significant decoration. Many Marines never received any medals. But he also knew that capturing 1,300 prisoners was unprecedented. Unprecedented actions usually received unprecedented recognition. Something had gone wrong in the approval process, but there was nothing he could do about it. In November 1944, Gabaldon was medically discharged from the Marine Corps. He returned to Los Angeles. His leg had healed. He could walk without assistance, but he had a permanent limp. And he had memories that would not fade. Gabaldon returned to East Los Angeles in November 1944. He was 18 years old. He had been in combat for 5 months. He had captured more enemy prisoners than any American soldier in history, and almost nobody knew about it. The neighborhood looked the same streets, same buildings, same people. But Gabaldon had changed. He had nightmares about the bonsai charge, about bodies stacked on beaches, about civilians jumping from cliffs, about the machine gun on Tinian. The memories did not fade with time. They became more vivid. He tried to reconnect with old friends, but most were still overseas, fighting in Europe or the Pacific. The ones who had returned did not talk about combat. Nobody wanted to hear war stories. Gabaldon stopped mentioning Saipan, stopped talking about the prisoners. People did not believe him anyway. One Marine capturing 800 Japanese sounded like propaganda, like a Hollywood movie, not real. In February 1945, Gabaldon received his Silver Star in a small ceremony at the Federal Building in Los Angeles. A Navy officer presented the medal, read the citation, thanked him for his service. The ceremony lasted 15 minutes. No press coverage, no family photos. Just Gabaldon and the officer and an empty room. The war ended in August 1945. Japan surrendered after atomic bombs destroyed Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Gabaldon watched the celebrations in Los Angeles, people dancing in the streets, hugging strangers, crying with relief. He felt nothing, just emptiness. The war was over, but the memories remained. Gabaldon struggled to find work. His leg had healed, but the limp was permanent. Employers did not want to hire disabled veterans. He tried working in machine shops, construction sites, warehouses. Nothing lasted. He moved frequently. Los Angeles, Mexico, Alaska, searching for something he could not define. In 1957, a television producer contacted Gabaldon. The show was called This Is Your Life. They wanted to feature his story. Gabaldon agreed. The episode aired with Marine Corps veterans confirming his prisoner captures. The show reached millions of viewers. Suddenly, people believed him. Letters arrived from across the country. Veterans who had served on Saipan. Relatives of Marines who had been there. People thanking him for his service. Hollywood noticed. In 1959, Allied artists' pictures began developing a film about Gabaldon's experiences on Saipan. The movie was titled Hell to Eternity. Gabaldon served as a consultant during filming. He helped with dialogue, corrected historical details, made sure the Japanese language was accurate. But Hollywood made changes. They cast Jeffrey Hunter as Gabaldon. Hunter was 6 feet tall, blue eyes, Scottish American. Nothing like the 5'4" Mexican American teenager who actually lived the story. Gabaldon protested. The studio said Hunter was bankable. Audiences wanted a leading man who looked like a movie star, not like the real Guy Gabaldon. The film was released in 1960. It was moderately successful. Critics praised the action sequences. The film depicted the bonsai charge, the prisoner captures, the lone wolf operations. But it romanticized the story, made it cleaner, more heroic, less complicated than reality. Gabaldon watched the premiere. He said later that Jeffrey Hunter did not look anything like him, but the film brought attention to his story. 1 month after the film's release, the Marine Corps announced it was upgrading Gabaldon's Silver Star to the Navy Cross, the second highest military decoration for valor. The upgrade came 16 years after the original recommendation for Medal of Honor. No explanation was given for the timing. Many assumed the publicity from the film pressured the Marine Corps to act. The Navy Cross ceremony was held in San Diego. Marine Corps Commandant General David Shoup presented the medal. Shoup had fought at Tarawa. He understood the Pacific War. He told Gabaldon that his actions on Saipan had saved American and Japanese lives. That negotiation was often braver than fighting. That Gabaldon deserved recognition. But questions remained. Why not the Medal of Honor? Gabaldon had been recommended by his commanding officer. Witnesses confirmed the prisoner captures. Intelligence reports documented the value of information gained. 1,300 prisoners was unprecedented. What more did the Marine Corps need? Some suggested racism. Mexican-American soldiers rarely received top decorations during World War II. Others said the numbers seemed impossible, that one Marine could not realistically capture that many prisoners, that Gabaldon must have exaggerated. But the witnesses were clear. The prisoners were counted. The records existed. After receiving the Navy Cross, Gabaldon moved to Saipan. He lived there for 20 years, built a business, raised a family, helped establish youth programs, became part of the community. The island where he had fought became his home. Japanese tourists sometimes recognized him, thanked him for treating their ancestors with respect during the war, for keeping his promises about humane treatment. In 1990, Gabaldon published his memoir, Saipan, Suicide Island. The book detailed his experiences, the prisoner captures, the negotiations, the combat, the aftermath. It sold modestly. Military historians used it as a source, but it never reached mainstream audiences. Throughout his later life, Gabaldon advocated for his Medal of Honor upgrade. He contacted politicians, military officials, veterans organizations. He argued that his actions met the criteria, that politics or prejudice had blocked the award, that justice delayed was justice denied. But the recommendation never advanced beyond initial review. In 2005, Gabaldon received the Chesty Puller Award from the World War II Veterans Committee.
The award recognized Marines who demonstrated extraordinary heroism, but received insufficient recognition. It was not the Medal of Honor, but it acknowledged that something had gone wrong with the original recommendation process. Guy Gabaldon died on August 31, 2006. He was 80 years old. He was buried with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery. His Navy Cross, his Silver Star, his Purple Heart, but not the Medal of Honor he believed he deserved. Guy Gabaldon's methods changed how the United States military approached prisoner capture operations. Before Saipan, the prevailing assumption was that Japanese soldiers would never surrender, that every cave had to be cleared with flamethrowers and explosives, that negotiation was impossible. Gabaldon proved that assumption wrong. After the war, military analysts studied his techniques. They examined how he used language, how he made promises and kept them, how he built trust through consistency. The analysis influenced psychological operations training, interrogation techniques, prisoner handling procedures. The military realized that cultural understanding could be as valuable as firepower. But Gabaldon never received full recognition during his lifetime. The Medal of Honor question haunted him. He spent decades advocating for the upgrade. He contacted every Marine Corps commandant from 1960 through 2005. He wrote letters to Congress, appeared at veteran events, told his story repeatedly, hoping someone would listen, hoping justice would prevail. In 1998, several of Gabaldon's fellow Marines from Saipan launched a campaign to upgrade his Navy Cross to Medal of Honor. They gathered witness statements, located intelligence reports, built documentation showing the impact of his prisoner captures. The campaign gained support from Hispanic veteran organizations, from military historians, from members of Congress.
The recommendation reached the Secretary of the Navy, but it stalled. The problem was time. Medal of Honor recommendations had a strict timeline. They had to be submitted within 3 years of the action. Gabaldon's original recommendation had been downgraded in 1944. By 1998, it was 54 years too late. The law allowed no exceptions. Advocates argued the rule was unjust, that Gabaldon had been denied proper recognition due to prejudice or error, that extraordinary circumstances warranted exception. But the Department of Defense maintained its position. No matter how deserving, the timeline had expired. The decision was final. Some military historians disagree about whether Gabaldon truly captured 800 prisoners in one day. Lieutenant Robert Cheeks, a Marine Japanese language officer who served on Saipan, expressed skepticism in later interviews. He suggested Gabaldon exaggerated the numbers, that many prisoners were civilians, not combatants, that other Marines helped with the capture but received no credit. But the official records support Gabaldon's account. Navy Cross citation states over 1,000 prisoners. Captain John Schwab's recommendation describes the 800 captured on July 8th. Intelligence reports reference information gained from mass surrenders. Multiple Marines witnessed the column of prisoners on the beach. The documentation exists. The numbers are verified. What cannot be disputed is that Gabaldon developed methods that worked, that he saved lives on both sides, that he proved negotiation could succeed where violence would have failed, that his courage was demonstrated not through killing, but through risk. Walking alone toward enemy positions required a different kind of bravery, one that military culture often undervalues. Today, a memorial plaque honoring Guy Gabaldon stands at the Garapan American Memorial Park on Saipan. The plaque describes his prisoner captures, his methods,
His impact. Japanese tourists visit the site. Some leave flowers. Some leave notes thanking him for treating their grandfathers with dignity during surrender. In 2018, documentary filmmakers interviewed the last surviving members of Gabaldon's unit. The Marines confirmed his story, described watching him walk toward caves alone, seeing him return with hundreds of prisoners. They said Gabaldon never bragged about his actions, never sought glory. He just did what he thought was right, and he lived with the consequences. The United States Marine Corps teaches Gabaldon's methods at cultural awareness training courses. Future Marines learn about psychological operations, about building rapport with enemy combatants, about the strategic value of prisoners, about how one teenager with broken Japanese saved thousands of lives through courage and creativity rather than firepower. If this story moved you the way it moved us, do me a favor, hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We're rescuing forgotten stories from dusty archives every single day. Stories about Marines who saved lives with broken Japanese and a bluff. Real people, real heroism. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you're watching from. Are you watching from the United States, United Kingdom, Canada? Our community stretches across the entire world. You're not just a viewer, You're part of keeping these memories alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family served. Just let us know you're here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for making sure Guy Gabaldon doesn't disappear into silence. These men deserve to be remembered, and you're helping make that happen.